When people think about privacy, they often picture a pop-up banner, a link in a website footer, or a long policy page nobody reads, but privacy management starts in a more practical place than that. A privacy notice is not just a document you publish. It is a promise you make about how you actually handle personal data day to day. The hard part is not writing something that sounds reasonable, because almost any team can do that in an afternoon, but aligning what you say with what your systems and processes truly do. That alignment is what transparency means in practice, and it is also where many organizations get into trouble without realizing it. In this lesson, we will treat privacy notices as operational tools, not legal decoration, and we will focus on how a program manager builds a notice process that stays accurate even as products, vendors, and business priorities keep changing. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at CIPM in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful way to begin is to separate the idea of transparency from the idea of disclosure, because they get blended together in everyday talk. Disclosure is the act of telling people facts, like what data you collect, why you collect it, and who you share it with. Transparency is the broader quality of being understandable and truthful about what is happening, including what is not happening, and that quality shows up in timing, clarity, and consistency. If a notice is technically complete, but written so vaguely that a normal person cannot connect it to real life, it may still fail the spirit of transparency. If a notice is written clearly but updated once every few years while the product changes monthly, it will drift away from reality and become misleading. Operationalizing transparency means building routines that keep disclosures accurate, understandable, and delivered at the moments when they matter. The first operational question to ask is what exactly a privacy notice is supposed to do for the person reading it, because that goal changes the way you design the work. A notice should help someone predict how their data will be used so they can make informed choices, like whether to sign up, whether to share optional information, or whether to use a certain feature. A notice should also help someone understand what rights or options they have, such as how to access their data or how to ask a question. From the organization's point of view, a notice also creates accountability because it forces teams to describe their practices in a way that can be compared against reality. When those goals are clear, the notice stops being a static page and becomes part of a broader transparency system that includes product screens, help articles, customer support scripts, and internal procedures. To keep a notice aligned with reality, you have to understand the types of statements that usually become incorrect over time. Some statements are stable, like the general purpose of operating an account, preventing fraud, or providing customer support, which tend to remain relevant even as details shift. Other statements are highly unstable, like lists of third-party recipients, specific categories of tracking technologies, or descriptions of how data moves between services and regions. Teams often write unstable statements in a confident tone because they sound authoritative, but those are the statements most likely to fall out of date as vendors change, features expand, or new analytics tools get turned on. Operationalizing transparency means treating unstable statements like living inventory items that require a maintenance process rather than a one-time drafting decision. Another key idea is that transparency is not only about what is written, but also about where and when information is delivered. A long notice on a website might satisfy a formal requirement to publish information, yet still fail users because it is far from the moment they are making a choice. That is why many privacy programs use layered transparency, where a short explanation appears near the collection point and deeper details are available through links or additional screens. The short layer helps a person quickly understand what is happening right now, while the deeper layer allows those who care to explore details without slowing everyone else down. Operationally, this means you are not managing one notice, but a set of transparency artifacts that must stay consistent with each other. If the short layer says one thing and the long-form notice says another, trust erodes quickly, and the organization can end up appearing careless even when the mismatch was accidental. It helps to think of the privacy notice as a reflection of your data practices map, even if the notice is written in plain language rather than technical language. If you do not know what data you collect, from where, for what purpose, and which teams or vendors touch it, your notice will be based on guesses or assumptions. Those guesses might be harmless at first, but they become dangerous when a product adds a new collection point or a new use, because the notice will not automatically update itself. A mature privacy management program ties notice content to operational records like inventories, data flow maps, vendor registers, and retention rules, not because those tools are exciting, but because they provide the ground truth. When you build that connection, updating transparency becomes less of a fire drill and more of a controlled routine. One common misconception is that privacy notices are owned solely by legal, while everyone else just provides input when asked. In practice, a notice touches product design, marketing claims, customer support language, security disclosures, and vendor arrangements, so it cannot be maintained by one function in isolation. Legal may be responsible for the wording and compliance, but they are not the source of truth for how systems work. Product teams know what features are being built, security teams know what monitoring occurs, and data teams know what analytics pipelines exist. Operationalizing notices means defining a clear operating model, where roles are assigned for gathering facts, reviewing changes, approving updates, and publishing. The goal is not to create bureaucracy for its own sake, but to ensure that when reality changes, your transparency materials change with it. A practical operational model often starts by defining what counts as a notice-triggering change, because not every internal tweak needs a public update. Adding a new category of personal data, creating a new purpose for processing, or enabling a new kind of sharing tends to be notice-relevant. Switching a vendor that performs the same role might be relevant depending on how specific your notice is and what commitments you have made, such as whether you list recipients by name. Changing retention periods, altering how users can exercise rights, or expanding into a new region with different legal expectations can also require updates. If you leave this vague, teams will not know when to escalate changes, and notice accuracy becomes luck-based. If you define clear triggers, you create a predictable path where changes are caught early and assessed calmly. Once triggers are defined, you need an intake path that connects product and operational changes to privacy review, because many notice failures happen when changes bypass privacy entirely. The intake path can be tied to feature launches, procurement processes, marketing campaigns, or changes to data collection screens. The important part is that privacy notice review is not a separate, optional step that people remember only after something goes wrong. Instead, it should be embedded into the same workflows that already exist for releasing features or signing vendors. When teams see transparency as part of shipping a product responsibly, they are more likely to provide accurate details early, which reduces last-minute rewriting and prevents rushed decisions that create vague or misleading language. Another operational concern is consistency across channels, because users experience your privacy program through many different touchpoints. A user might see a cookie banner, read a short explanation during sign-up, receive an email about account changes, and later open a full notice when looking for settings. If those messages do not match, users assume the organization is hiding something, even if the mismatch is just poor coordination. From a program manager's perspective, this means you need a single source of truth for notice content and controlled reuse of standard language. It also means managing translations, regional variants, and product-specific notices in a way that keeps core statements aligned while allowing necessary differences. Transparency is not only about saying the right things, but saying them consistently wherever the user encounters them. Clarity is another part of transparency that becomes operational when you treat it as a quality requirement, not just a writing style preference. Overly broad phrases like "we may use your data to improve our services" can be technically true, but they can also be so nonspecific that a user cannot understand what it means. On the other hand, extremely detailed technical descriptions can overwhelm and confuse people, especially beginners, and can also become outdated quickly. The operational goal is to find a stable middle that describes categories of use and sharing in a way that a normal person can understand, while still being accurate. One useful test is to ask whether an average person could predict what will happen next with their data based on what you wrote, such as whether their activity will be analyzed for trends or whether their email might be used for marketing. If the answer is no, The notice may be compliant on paper, but weak as a transparency tool. Timing matters just as much as wording, because transparency is partly about giving information before a decision is made. If you explain a data use only after data has been collected, people may feel tricked, even if the explanation exists somewhere. Operationalizing transparency means focusing on collection points and decision points, like creating an account, turning on a feature, connecting a third-party service, or entering sensitive information. The notice strategy should ensure that the most relevant information is surfaced at those points in a short, understandable form, with easy access to more detail. This approach also helps manage consent and preferences when those are relevant, because people are more likely to make meaningful choices when information is presented in context. Even when consent is not the legal basis, contextual transparency supports trust and reduces confusion. It is also important to treat transparency as something that can be measured and tested, because notice accuracy is not just a belief. One operational approach is to periodically compare notice statements to reality by checking inventories, reviewing data flow maps, sampling vendor contracts, and interviewing system owners. If your notice says you do not share data for targeted advertising, you should be able to confirm whether advertising-related tags, pixels, or partner integrations exist. If your notice says you retain certain data for a specific period, you should be able to confirm whether deletion or archival actually happens. This is not about catching people doing something wrong on purpose. It is about recognizing that complex systems drift. Regular checks turn transparency into an auditable claim rather than a marketing statement, and that makes the entire privacy program stronger. A final operational challenge is change communication, because sometimes updating the notice is not enough by itself. Some changes affect user expectations so strongly that users should be actively informed, not just expected to discover a revised page. Whether that is required depends on law and context, but from a trust perspective, surprising people is almost always a bad strategy. Operationalizing transparency includes deciding when to provide direct notices, such as emails or in-product messages, and how to explain changes plainly without causing panic or confusion. It also includes version control, so you can show what changed, when it changed, and why it changed, which can matter for accountability and for responding to questions later. When this is done well, a notice update becomes a routine communication practice, not a reactive scramble. As you put all of this together, the main takeaway is that privacy notices are a living interface between your data practices and the people whose data you handle. If the notice is disconnected from operational reality, it becomes a liability because it creates promises you cannot reliably keep. If it is connected to inventories, change workflows, and cross-team accountability, it becomes a stabilizing force that keeps the organization honest about what it is doing. Transparency is not a single document, and it is not achieved by writing more words. It is achieved by building processes that keep statements accurate, clear, timely, and consistent. For a privacy program manager, this is a core operational skill because it touches almost every other program area, from vendor management to incident response to training. When you operationalize notices well, you are not just checking a box. You are building trust through disciplined alignment between what you say and what you do.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.